The November morning crept through the windows of their Savannah loft, casting long shadows across Clara Whitmore's bathroom floor. Her hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test, the two pink lines as clear as the frost forming on the window pane. At 31, she had always prided herself on having life figured out, but now her heart raced with equal parts hope and dread. She caught her reflection in the mirror. Hazel eyes, rimmed with uncertainty, shoulder-length chestnut hair, still tousled from sleep. The designer blazer hanging on the door seemed to mock her perfectly curated life, a life that had been slowly unraveling for months. Despite her desperate attempts to hold everything together, the familiar scent of vanilla-iced coffee wafted up from the kitchen where the coffee maker hummed its morning song. It was a comfort ritual she'd developed over the past few months. As Damien's late nights at the tech firm became more frequent, her husband of 3 years, Damien Lucas Hale, with his perfectly styled sandy blonde hair and tailored suits, had become a stranger in their own home. Maybe this changes everything, Clara whispered to herself, unconsciously biting her lower lip, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. Her fingers found a loose receipt on the counter, and she began doodling abstract patterns on its edges, another anxiety tell she'd carried since childhood. The house felt different today. The high ceilings and modern furniture that had once felt like achievements now echoed with emptiness. She pulled her favorite skinny jeans from the drawer, paired them with a cream silk blouse and her trusted ankle boots, armor for the day ahead. As she spritzed on her daisy perfume, Clara's phone buzzed with a message from Damien. "Late meeting tonight? Don't wait up." Her stomach clenched. Lately, his messages had been getting shorter, more distant. The warning bells in her mind grew louder. But she pushed them away. Instead, she focused on planning the perfect dinner to share her news. She'd make his favorite, a recipe she'd learned from his mother, Margot Hale, during one of her attempts to win over the formidable Connecticut socialite. Throughout the day at her graphic design firm, Clara's mind wandered to the future. She sketched nursery designs between client projects, imagining soft yellows and greens, gender-neutral and perfect. Her coworkers noticed her distraction but chalked it up to the approaching holiday season. Evening arrived with a bitter wind. Clara had set the table with their wedding china, the sterling silver gleaming under the dimmed lights. The scent of roasted herbs filled the air, mingling with the lingering aroma of her baking apple pie, Damien's favorite dessert. Every detail was intentional. Every aroma, every plate, a silent offering of hope. At 9:47 p.m., the front door finally opened. Damien's 6'2" frame cast a long shadow in the entryway. His gray-blue eyes looked tired. His usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled. The familiar notes of Bleu de Chanel surrounded him. But there was something else. A sweeter, unfamiliar scent that made Clara's heart skip a beat. It clung to him like guilt. "You waited up," he said, his voice carrying none of the warmth it once held. "I told you not to." "I made dinner," Clara replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I have something to tell you." Damien loosened his tie, his wedding ring catching the light. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted, and I've got an early meeting tomorrow." Clara's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. The pregnancy test seemed to burn in her pocket, where she'd kept it all day waiting for this moment. Her heart pounded like a trapped bird in her chest. But looking at her husband now, at the distance in his eyes and the way he couldn't quite meet her gaze, the words stuck in her throat. "Of course," she heard herself say, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. It was like swallowing glass. "It can wait." As Damien disappeared upstairs without touching the meal she'd prepared, Clara stood in their kitchen, surrounded by cooling food and unspoken truths. The candles flickered with no one left to impress. The November wind howled outside, rattling the windows, as if nature itself was trying to warn her of the storm to come. 3 days after the dinner that turned cold, Clara sat in her home office, surrounded by the soft glow of her computer screen. The nausea that had become her morning companion lingered well into the afternoon. She rubbed her temples, trying to focus on the branding project due next week when a notification popped up on her screen. Damien had forgotten to log out of their shared cloud account. Her cursor hovered over the notification. She'd never been the type to snoop, priding herself on the trust they'd built. But something, Perhaps the same instinct that made her keep the pregnancy test hidden in her drawer urged her to click. Her finger trembled like it already knew. What she found made her blood run cold. Hotel receipts, late-night dinner reservations for two at places she'd never been. And messages, hundreds of them, to someone named Isla. The most recent from just an hour ago. Missing you already. Can't wait for tonight. Clara's hands shook as she scrolled through the evidence of her husband's other life. Each message hit like a blow to the chest. The world didn't just fall apart, it collapsed silently, politely, in Helvetica font. The texts painted a picture of a months-long affair, filled with inside jokes and intimate moments that felt like daggers to her heart. But it was a photo that finally broke her. Damien and a striking brunette, their faces close, her hand on his chest, his smile, not the forced one he gave her lately, but soft and easy, like it belonged to someone else. The timestamp showed last Friday, when he'd claimed to be at a client dinner. She remembered that night. The way she'd waited up with tea growing cold in her hands. The way he kissed her forehead and said he was exhausted. Liar. The woman was beautiful in an effortless way, with long, dark hair and a free spirit that radiated even through the digital image. Isla Moreau, according to her linked social media profile, marketing consultant. 25. No ring, no guilt, no stretch marks or sleepless nights. Everything Clara wasn't. Breathe, she whispered to herself, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. But her lungs refused to cooperate. The air felt thick, poisoned with betrayal. The room seemed to spin. The carefully curated art prints on her walls, her own designs, blurred into meaningless shapes. Each frame mocked her with memories of a life she thought was real. Her phone buzzed. Marie, her mother. "Sweetie, you missed our lunch date. Everything okay?" Clara tried to respond, but a sob escaped instead. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Marie said. No questions asked. While waiting for her mother, Clara printed everything. Each page felt heavier than the last. Reservations, messages, photos, a paper trail of betrayal. The printer's soft hum was the only sound in the room, mechanical and cruel. She organized them methodically, the designer in her needing order, even in chaos, stapling lies together, punch-holing heartbreak, labeling grief in neat black ink. Marie arrived like a warm breeze in a storm, her presence filling the house with strength Clara desperately needed. At 55, Marie Whitmore carried herself with the grace of someone who'd weathered her own storms and come out stronger. "Oh, honey," she said, taking in Clara's tear-stained face and the scattered papers. She wrapped her daughter in an embrace that smelled of home and safety. Lavender lotion and coffee, the scent of being protected. "I'm pregnant." Clara whispered into her mother's shoulder. Marie stiffened for just a moment, then held her daughter tighter. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. And so Clara did. The test, the dinner, the discoveries. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. Every word released a little more poison from her chest. Marie listened, her face growing stormy, her hands clenched, the matriarch becoming a shield. When Clara finished, Marie picked up one of the photos, studying it with narrow eyes. "That bastard," she muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry, sweetheart, but he doesn't deserve you or this baby." "What do I do, Mom?" Clara's voice cracked. "I had everything planned, the nursery, the announcement at Christmas." "Plans change. You're stronger than you know, Clara Elise, and you're not alone." She said it like a vow, like a prophecy. A key turned in the front door. Damien, home early for once. Marie squeezed Clara's hand. "Want me to stay?" Clara straightened her spine, wiping her eyes. "No. I need to do this myself." Damien walked into the office, stopping short at the scene before him. His eyes darted from Marie to the papers on the desk, and his face drained of color. He started, but she cut him off. "How long?" Her voice was steady, surprisingly so, even to herself. "I should go," Marie said, but before leaving, she fixed Damien with a look that could freeze hell. "I raised my daughter to know her worth. Remember that." After Marie left, silence filled the room like smoke. Damien loosened his tie, his tailwind nervous. It's not what you think," he began. "Don't." Clara's voice was ice. "Don't insult me with lies. I've seen everything." She stood, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "I'm pregnant, by the way. Found out 3 days ago. Was going to tell you over that dinner. You skipped." She watched the color drain further from his face. "But I guess you were busy with Isla." Damien stumbled back as if physically struck. Pregnant. But we can fix this, Clara. It was a mistake. Isla was a mistake. A mistake implies once. She gestured to the stack of evidence. This was a choice. Multiple choices, Damien. Every dinner, every hotel, every lie. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the room. Clara thought about how many sunsets she'd watched alone while Damien was with her. The rage and hurt crystallized into something harder: resolve. "I'll be staying with my parents tonight," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "I suggest you use the time to think about what you want, because right now, you're about to lose everything." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of morning sickness and sleepless nights at her parents' Victorian-style home in Savannah's historic district. Clara spent her days working remotely, throwing herself into design projects while ignoring Damien's increasingly desperate texts. Her father, Graham, had taken to brewing her special ginger tea every morning, his pragmatic nature showing love through quiet action rather than words. That Wednesday morning started like any other, until the cramping began. At first, Clara dismissed it as normal pregnancy discomfort, but when she noticed the spots of blood, panic seized her chest. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. Graham appeared in the doorway, took one look at his daughter's pale face, and grabbed his car keys. "I'll call your mother. She'll meet us at the hospital." The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over everything. Clara lay on the examination table, her mother holding one hand while Dr. Andrea Martinez performed an ultrasound. The silence in the room was deafening. "There's still a heartbeat," Dr. Martinez finally said. "But you're experiencing some complications. The stress? You're under a lot of stress. It's affecting the pregnancy," Dr. Martinez said calmly. "You need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." The words felt like a gavel slamming down. A verdict Clara hadn't prepared for. Marie's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "She'll do whatever is necessary." Just then the door burst open. Damien, usually the image of composure, stood there, his immaculate appearance disheveled. "I came as soon as I got Graham's message. Is everything?" He stopped short. "Is everything okay?" Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "Damien, please. That's my child too." "Your child?" Marie's voice rose sharply, her presence filling the small room. Her calm exterior cracked, revealing a mother lion underneath. "Where were you when she needed you? When you were too busy destroying your family?" Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "Mr. Hale, I must ask you to leave. Any additional stress could seriously compromise the pregnancy." Damien hesitated. His gray-blue eyes met Clara's. For a heartbeat, the chaos faded, the noise muted. It was just them again, before everything broke. For a moment she saw a flicker of the man she'd married, concerned, loving, present. But like a mirage, it vanished. She remembered the photos, the texts, the lies, the perfume that wasn't hers, the hotel names that weren't familiar. And she turned away. Later that evening, tucked into her childhood bed, Clara scrolled through her work emails. That's when a message from an unknown sender caught her eye. Subject line: "You should know." Inside was a single photo, Damien and Isla standing outside a jewelry store. His hand rested on the small of Ila's back. Not on Clara's belly. Not where it should have been. The timestamp was from yesterday. Below the photo, a message: "He's planning to leave you. I thought you deserved to know." A friend at his firm. Her fingers went numb. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Clara clutched her stomach, remembering Dr. Martinez's warnings about stress. A pressure built in her chest, not just panic, but heartbreak turned physical. A soft knock at the door. "Princess," Graham said, using her childhood nickname as he stepped into the room. "I've been thinking, remember that brownstone I bought in Brooklyn last year? As an investment?" Clara nodded, unsure where this was going. "It's empty right now," he continued. "Could use a tenant, maybe someone who knows design, someone looking for a fresh start." Clara looked at her father, his kind eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the way he always knew exactly what she needed without her having to ask. Even now, he was building her an escape route with bricks of kindness. "New York," she whispered, tasting the possibility. "But my job, the divorce." "Your boss already agreed to let you work remotely, permanently," Graham said gently. "I called her," Marie added, appearing in the doorway, phone in hand. "And as for the divorce..." She held up her phone, showing a contact page. "Remember my college roommate? She's now one of the top divorce attorneys in New York. "We've watched you dim your light for him these past few years," Graham said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Maybe it's time to shine on your own terms." Clara's hand drifted to her stomach, thinking of the tiny life depending on her decisions. New York meant starting over, facing the unknown, being truly alone for the first time in her adult life. But staying in Savannah meant watching her marriage crumble in slow motion, seeing Damien and Isla build their life together, facing pitying looks at every familiar corner. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Damien. "We need to talk about everything, please." She deleted it without reading further. "Okay," she said, looking at her parents. New York, but not running away, running toward something new. Marie smiled, tears in her eyes. "That's my girl." That night, as Savannah's autumn wind rustled through the magnolia trees outside, Clara opened her laptop and began researching Brooklyn neighborhoods, prenatal vitamins, and New York's divorce laws. Each tab felt like a step toward a new chapter, one she'd write on her own terms. Her phone lit up one last time, Damien again. But this time, instead of the usual anxiety, she felt something different. The first stirrings of freedom. She turned the phone face down and continued planning her future, one Google search at a time. The Brooklyn brownstone's hardwood floors creaked under Clara's feet as she wandered through what would become her new home. February sun streamed through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across empty rooms full of possibility. At 5 months pregnant, her baby bump was now visible beneath her oversized sweater, a constant reminder of everything that had changed, and everything still to come. The previous tenants left that vintage drafting table in the spare room, Graham said, following her through the space. "Thought you might want to use it for your design work." Clara ran her fingers along the table's weathered surface, perfect for late-night sketching sessions when sleep proved elusive. "It's perfect, Dad." Marie emerged from the kitchen, phone in hand. "Just got off with Diane. The divorce papers will be ready tomorrow." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed concern. "Damien's contesting the terms. He wants shared custody of a child that isn't even born yet." Clara's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "He gave up that right when he moved in with Isla," Marie finished. "Yes, but legally it's more complicated." The news had reached Clara 2 weeks ago. Damien and Isla were living together in his Savannah penthouse. The same penthouse where he and Clara had spent their first year of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. The moving company had arrived with her belongings, what little she'd chosen to bring from her old life. As the movers began carrying in boxes, Clara retreated to the bay window in what would become her bedroom, watching Brooklyn life unfold on the street below. Children raced past with melting popsicles. A couple argued in soft laughter at the corner. Someone walked a dog that looked far too small for the leash. Life here pulsed, loud and unapologetic, a stark contrast to what she'd left behind. "Your mother told me about Damien," Graham said, joining her. "We'll fight him, if necessary. You know that, right?" Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her father, always the quiet protector, the steady foundation when everything else crumbled. The weight of his words pressed against her ribs like armor she hadn't realized she needed. The afternoon passed in a blur of unpacking and organizing. By sunset, her parents reluctantly prepared to leave for their hotel. Tomorrow, they'd fly back to Savannah, leaving Clara truly alone for the first time since everything had fallen apart. Her hands lingered a little longer on the folds of her mother's scarf. Her father kissed her forehead twice instead of once. "Promise you'll call if you need anything," Marie insisted, hugging her daughter tight. "Oh, and remember, your first prenatal appointment with Dr. Patel is next week. I can fly back." "Mom," Clara interrupted gently, "I'll be okay, really." She wasn't sure if she said it to reassure her mother or herself. After they left, Clara stood in her new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes in the growing darkness. The city's rhythm pulsed beyond her windows, car horns, distant sirens, the subway rumbling beneath the streets. So different from Savannah's genteel quiet. It was as if the city was breathing for her, louder and stronger than she could manage on her own. Her phone chimed. A text from Damien. "My lawyer contacted yours. We need to discuss the baby's future. Please don't shut me out." Before she could respond, another message arrived. This one from an unknown number. You can't run forever. He'll never be just yours. Isla. The audacity stole Clara's breath. It wasn't just a message. It was a violation, a ghost clawing at the walls of her new life. With trembling fingers, she blocked both numbers. Then, driven by a sudden surge of energy, she began unpacking with renewed purpose. Each item she placed felt like a small act of defiance. Her favorite coffee mug on the kitchen counter. Her sketches pinned to the walls. Her clothes hanging in the closet. Every drawer she filled was a line drawn in the sand. This space was hers. Her sanctuary. Her fresh start. At the bottom of a box labeled office, she found something unexpected. Her old sketchbook from college. Filled with dreams and designs she'd set aside for Damien's career, his ambitions, his life. The edges were worn, some pages smudged with graphite, others stained with tears she no longer remembered crying. She settled at the vintage drafting table, flipping through pages of forgotten possibilities. On the last blank page, she began to sketch, not client work or nursery designs, but something else. Abstract shapes that morphed into concrete forms, chaos transforming into order. It was messy, imperfect, but it was hers. She drew until her hand cramped, the city lights twinkling through her windows. A gentle flutter in her stomach made her pause. The baby, her baby, moving, for the first time. Just you and me, little one, Clara whispered, pressing her palm against the spot. We're going to be okay. She looked around the room, at the drafting table bathed in streetlight, the skyline visible through her windows, the endless possibilities stretching before her. For the first time since November, she felt something close to peace. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and custody battles, doctor appointments, and client deadlines. But tonight, in this moment, Clara allowed herself to simply be a woman, rewriting her own story, one page at a time. Spring arrived in Brooklyn with a burst of cherry blossoms and unseasonably warm weather. At 7 months pregnant, Clara had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. Morning client calls, afternoon walks through the neighborhood, evenings spent working on her growing freelance portfolio. Her body had changed, but so had her spirit, growing stronger with each passing day. That particular Tuesday morning found her at her favorite coffee shop, The Daily Grind, nursing a decaf vanilla iced coffee while reviewing branding designs for a tech startup. The owner, an elderly woman named Rose, had taken to saving Clara's preferred corner table, away from the window, but close enough to people watch. Mind if I join you? Every other table's taken. Clara looked up to find a tall, bald man with an immaculately trimmed beard and kind brown eyes. He held a Turkish coffee in one hand and a laptop bag in the other. Something about his presence, confident yet gentle, made her hesitate, only briefly. She nodded. I'm Eli, he said, settling into the chair across from her. The rich scent of his cologne, something woody and sophisticated, mingled with the coffee shop's familiar aroma. I'm Clara, she replied, then quickly returned to her work, hoping to discourage conversation. She'd had enough of men and their charming smiles to last a lifetime. But Eli seemed content with the silence, focused on his own laptop. Occasionally, she caught him absently stroking his beard, while staring intently at the screen, a gesture that somehow made him seem more human, less threatening. The peaceful coexistence was shattered by her phone buzzing against the table. Damien's lawyer's number flashed across the screen. Clara's hand trembled as she declined the call, but not before Eli caught a glimpse of her expression. Bad news? He asked, his voice gentle, full of genuine concern. Perhaps it was pregnancy hormones, or maybe just months of holding everything in. You? But Clara found herself answering. Ex-husband's lawyer. They're pushing for shared custody before the baby's even born. Ah, Eli said, closing his laptop. Family law isn't my specialty, but I know something about difficult exes. My former fiancé tried to take half my tech company in the breakup. Despite herself, Clara was intrigued. What happened? Turned out she was more interested in my stock options than me. He gave a rueful smile. Expensive lesson in trust. Before Clara could respond, another call came through, this time from her doctor's office. Her expression darkened as she listened to the message. Everything okay? Eli asked when she hung up. My regular appointment got canceled. They can't reschedule until next week. But I needed to discuss some concerns about... She trailed off, suddenly aware she was oversharing with a stranger. Eli pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. My sister's an OB/GYN at Mount Sinai. Best doctor in the city. Tell her I sent you. She owes me for fixing her website last month. Clara studied the card. Dr. Leila Calloway, maternal fetal medicine specialist. Looking back at Eli, she noticed, for the first time, the family resemblance he'd mentioned. Something in the shape of the eyes, the warmth of the smile. I don't need, she started. Charity? Eli finished for her. It's not. It's one parent-to-be helping another. I have a daughter from my previous marriage. Those prenatal appointments? They shouldn't be faced alone. Something in his tone, understanding without pity, made Clara's carefully constructed walls waver. She slipped the card into her wallet. Thank you, she said softly. Their conversation was interrupted as Rose brought Eli's lunch order. Your usual, Mr. Calloway. And Clara, honey, I added extra pickles to your sandwich. Growing babies need their cravings satisfied. Eli raised an eyebrow. The turkey club with extra pickles and no tomatoes, that's been my standing order for months. Minus the turkey, Clara corrected, plus cucumber. A small smile tugged at her lips. The afternoon light filtered through the coffee shop's windows, casting a warm glow over their shared corner. For the first time in months, Clara felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. Just slightly. Not because of Eli, specifically, but because of the reminder. Not every unexpected encounter had to end in betrayal. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. From Ulla, Damien misses his family. The family you're taking from him. Clara's hands clenched around her phone. Eli noticed the change in her demeanor, but didn't pry. Instead, he simply pushed the plate of cookies Rose had brought closer to her side of the table. Sometimes, he said casually, returning to his work, the best revenge is living well. Clara picked up a cookie, considering his words. Living well. Maybe that's what all this was about. Not running away, not fighting back, but simply living well on her own terms. She opened her design software again, but this time with new energy. Each stroke of her digital pen felt like another step toward that goal. Living well, growing stronger, building a life that was entirely her own. The humidity hung heavy in the June air as Clara waddled, there was no other word for it now, into her lawyer's Manhattan office. Dr. Leila Calloway had become not just her physician, but a friend, assuring her that both she and the baby were healthy, despite the stress. But today's meeting threatened to undo all the careful calm she'd built. Damien's filed for an emergency hearing, said Diana Morrison, her attorney, sliding a document across the polished desk. He's claiming you fled the state to deny him his parental rights. Clara's grip tightened on the arms of her chair. Fled? I left because he moved in with his mistress. I know, Diana said, her expression grim, but his firm has significant influence, even here in New York. They're pushing for mandatory mediation before the birth. The baby kicked sharply as if sensing her distress. 8 months of building a new life, finding her footing. And now Damien was trying to drag her back into his chaos. When? She asked. Next week, in Savannah. The room spun slightly. Savannah, where Damien and Isla played house in her old home. Where whispers and stares would follow her every move. I'll go with you, Diana offered. We'll show them exactly why you left. Outside the office, the sky darkened with the approach of summer storms. Clara's phone lit up with a message from Eli. Coffee shop's empty. Perfect for finishing that deadline design you mentioned. Over the past month, their chance meeting had evolved into a comfortable friendship. Eli never pushed, never assumed. Just offered quiet support, and the kind of dad jokes so bad, they were actually funny. His daughter, Lily, had even started joining them sometimes, her 7-year-old chatter filling the coffee shop with light. But today, Clara couldn't face even that gentle companionship. Rain check, she texted back. Our lawyer meeting ran long. 3 dots appeared on the screen almost immediately. Everything okay? Before Clara could respond, another message popped up. From Isla. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Damien's already baby-proofing the house. The words hit like acid on an open wound. Anger surged through Clara, hot and fierce. She yanked her phone up to block Isla's number again, but her trembling fingers slipped on the screen, accidentally opening her photo gallery instead. There, buried among recent ultrasound pictures, was an image from last November. Her and Damien at a charity gala, his arm around her waist, both smiling. She looked happy, unknowing. trusting a man who was already pulling away. She looked like a fool. Thunder cracked overhead. As the first fat raindrops fell, Clara ducked into the nearest subway station, her mind racing. The mediation would force her to face not just Damien, but the life she'd left behind. The friends who'd chosen sides, the social circle that had splintered, the version of herself that had clung to a crumbling marriage, the dreams that had shattered like glass. Her phone buzzed again. Eli this time. Lily asked if you're coming to her dance recital next week. No pressure, just throwing it out there. Clara stared at the message, and her chest tightened. Not from dread, but from something warmer, more unexpected. Something inside Clara cracked open. Here was a child who had welcomed her into their little coffee shop family, without question, who drew pictures of Miss Clara and baby in rainbow crayons, who represented everything pure and uncomplicated about love, who never needed an explanation to offer affection. I can't, she typed back. Have to go to Savannah. Legal stuff. The response came quickly. Need a friend to talk to? Rose just made fresh cookies. Clara hesitated. Her instinct was to retreat, to handle this alone like she had with everything else. She'd built walls so high, even she didn't know how to get out sometimes. But as another crack of thunder shook the subway station, she remembered Dr. Layla's words at her last appointment. Strength isn't about carrying everything alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let others help carry the load. Actually, she replied, I could really use those cookies. 20 minutes later, she sat in their usual corner at the daily grind, the storm raging outside. While she told Eli everything, the emergency hearing, Isla's taunts, the mandatory return to Savannah, he simply listened. No interruptions, no attempts to fix it, just the steady hum of someone who cared. When she finished, he asked, Want some backup? Lily's recital got postponed anyway. I could fly down, be there for moral support. No strings. No expectations, just a friend in your corner. Clara looked at him. This man, who had never once made her feel weak for needing help, who respected her boundaries while offering unwavering support. For the first time, she really let herself see him. The kindness in his eyes, the steady presence he offered, the way he made space for her healing without trying to fix everything. Not a rescuer, not a replacement, just safe. I can't ask you to. You didn't, he interrupted gently. I offered. Big difference, Eli interrupted gently. Outside, the storm began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not just the baby moving, but something in her heart. A wall lowering just slightly. A door opening just a crack. Okay, she said softly. Thank you. Savannah's familiar humidity wrapped around Clara like an unwelcome embrace as she stepped out of the courthouse. The mediation had been exactly as brutal as she'd expected. Damien, impeccable in his tailored suit, had played the part of the concerned father-to-be perfectly, while his high-powered legal team painted her as an unstable woman who'd fled with his unborn child. You did well in there, Eli murmured beside her, his steady presence the only thing keeping her grounded. He'd kept his promise, flying down the day before, booking a room at a different hotel from hers to avoid any appearance of impropriety that Damien's lawyers might exploit. Did I? Clara's voice cracked. You heard them. Emotionally unstable, vindictive, using the pregnancy as a weapon. Her hand rested on her prominent belly. The baby was particularly active today, as if sensing the tension. Miss Whitmore? Clara froze at the familiar voice. Turning, she found herself face to face with Ela Moreau. For the first time, the woman was even more striking in person. Her dark hair gleamed in the Savannah sun. A designer dress hugged every curve. But it was her expression, a mixture of triumph and challenge, that made Clara's blood run cold. I think we should talk, Ela said, stepping closer. Woman to woman. Eli moved slightly, positioning himself between them. I don't think that's necessary. And you are. Isla's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. Before Eli could answer, Clara cut in, finding her voice. We're leaving. But Isla wasn't finished. Damien's changed, you know. He's ready to be a father, to make things right, if you'd just be reasonable. Reasonable. The word exploded from Clara with unexpected force. Was he being reasonable when he carried on with you for months, when he lied to my face, when he moved you into our home before I'd even packed my things? The baby kicked sharply, and Clara winced, pressing a hand to her side. Eli's hand immediately went to her elbow, steadying her. You should go, he said, his voice low, firm. He told Isla, his voice quiet but firm now. Not loud, not angry, just final. Something flickered in Ella's eyes as she looked between them. Oh, I see, she said. Didn't take you long to replace him, did it? Her tone was sweet as venom. The kind that smiled while it bit. That's enough. The new voice belonged to Marie, who'd appeared from the courthouse. My daughter doesn't owe you any explanations. Not now. Not ever. The steel in her voice left no room for debate. It was the sound of generations of women who had endured and refused to break. Isla opened her mouth to respond, but the arrival of Damien and his legal team created a momentary distraction. He looked at Clara, then at Isla, his eyes flickering with unease. But it was too late for discomfort to matter. Clara used the opportunity to slip away, Eli and Marie flanking her protectively. She didn't run. She walked, head high, each step a refusal to be dragged back into the chaos. They ended up at a small cafe several blocks away. One Clara had never visited during her life in Savannah, neutral territory, a place untouched by the memories, a clean slate between coffee and quiet. While Marie went to order their drinks, Eli studied Clara's face with concern. Your hands are shaking, he observed quietly. Clara looked down at her trembling fingers. Seeing them together, it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. All those months of texts and photos. But actually seeing them, hearing Isla's voice, feeling her entitlement, the way she spoke like Damien belonged to her. Want to know what I saw? Eli's voice was gentle. I saw two people desperately trying to convince themselves they made the right choice, and one incredibly strong woman who actually did. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. She blinked fast, not wanting to give the pain that satisfaction. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. The mediator's recommendations, shared custody from birth, mandatory returns to Savannah every month. Damien having a say in every major decision. Being strong doesn't mean you're not scared, Eli said. It means you face it anyway, with your chin up and your heart cracked open. Marie returned with their drinks. Chamomile tea for Clara, Turkish coffee for Eli. She'd taken to mothering them both over the past 2 days, seemingly approving of the friendship that had developed between them. She handed Clara the tea like it was medicine. And maybe it was. The lawyers think we can contest some of the recommendations, Marie said, sitting down. Especially the monthly returns. No judge is going to force a nursing mother to travel that frequently. Clara sipped her tea, letting its warmth calm her nerves, letting it fill the places where fear had carved itself deep. Through the cafe window, she could see the spires of St. Andrew's Church, where she and Damien had married. The sight didn't bring the usual pain, just a dull acknowledgement of something past. Not grief, not anger, just stillness. Whatever happens, Eli said, you've got people in your corner. In New York, in Savannah, you're not alone in this. The baby moved again, gentler this time. Clara thought about her new life in Brooklyn, her growing business, the friendship with Eli and Lily, the peace she'd found in her brownstone. Damien and Isla might have taken her past, but they couldn't touch her future. No, Clara agreed, meeting Eli's steady gaze. I'm not alone anymore. The August heatwave hit New York with brutal force, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Damien's law office. Clara sat rigidly in the conference room, 9 months pregnant and beyond exhausted, as her ex-husband's voice rose in frustration. The air conditioning couldn't compete with the heat radiating off her skin or the tension suffocating the room. You can't seriously be considering a home birth in New York? Damien snapped, pacing the length of the mahogany table. Our child should be born in Savannah, in the hospital where generations of Hales. Our child? Clara interrupted, her voice ice cold, sharper than any legal brief in the room. You mean the child you denied was yours when Isla threatened to leave you? She paused. Oh yes, I heard about that little argument. Damien stopped pacing, his face drained of color. His jaw twitched, the mask slipping. Behind him, the Manhattan skyline shimmered in the summer haze, a world away from the genteel streets of Savannah, a world away from the lies he built there. Who told you that? He asked quietly. Your own father, actually. Clara watched the shock register on Damien's face. Harrison called me last week. Seems he's not too proud of how his son's been behaving. The revelation hung in the air between them. Harrison Hale, the family patriarch, reaching out to his former daughter-in-law had been unexpected. his words even more so. You deserve better than what my son became. Diana Morrison, Clara's lawyer, cleared her throat. If we could return to the matter at hand. A sharp pain cut through Clara's abdomen, stealing her breath. Her fingers curled into the chair's armrest. A gasp caught in her throat. She'd been having contractions all morning, but had dismissed them as Braxton Hicks. This one felt different, too sharp, too real, too now. Clara? Diana's voice sounded distant. Do you need? I'm fine, she managed. But another contraction hit, stronger this time. She doubled slightly, breath hitching. Her water broke with devastating clarity, spreading across the expensive office chair. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Damien's face went from angry to panicked. He froze, undone by the one thing he couldn't control. Someone call an ambulance. No, Clara gasped, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. Call Eli. He'll take me to Dr. Calloway. Eli? Damien's voice cracked. You're in labor, and you want that what? Clara challenged, even as another contraction ripped through her. That man who's been there for every appointment? Who helped paint the nursery? Who makes sure I eat when I work late? Her words hit like contractions, sharp, relentless, necessary. Diana was already dialing, while Damien's lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. No one in the room dared meet Clara's eyes. They all felt it, the shift, the realignment of loyalty, of truth. Through the haze of pain, Clara saw something shift in Damien's expression. Recognition, maybe, of what he'd thrown away. Eli arrived in record time, his usual calm presence a balm in the chaos. He took one look at the situation and moved to Clara's side, helping her up with practiced ease. Your hospital bag is still in my car. From yesterday's false alarm, he said softly. Layla's waiting at the hospital. Everything's ready. Damien stepped forward. I'm coming too. That's my child. No. Clara's voice was firm despite her pain. You'll be notified when the baby's born, as per the agreement. But you don't get to be there for this. You lost that right in November. Another contraction hit as Eli guided her toward the elevator. She heard Damien calling after them, heard Diana assuring him she'd keep him updated. But all she could focus on was Eli's steady heartbeat as she leaned against him. In the car, between contractions, Clara finally let her tears fall. I didn't want it to be like this. Any of it. Eli navigated through Manhattan traffic with remarkable calm. I know, but you're doing great, and think about it. Your child's already showing perfect dramatic timing. Definitely takes after their mother. Despite everything, Clara laughed, then winced as another contraction hit. Almost there, Eli assured her. Layla's the best, and I'll be right outside if you need anything. Clara hesitated, then pushed through her fear. Will you stay in the room? I don't want to do this alone. Eli's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, full of something that made her heart skip. You never have to do anything alone again, not if you don't want to. As they pulled up to Mount Sinai, Clara felt another shift inside her. Not just the baby preparing for arrival, but something in her soul clicking into place. She had walked away from a life built on lies and found something real, something true. Her phone buzzed, another message from Damien, but also one from Lily. Good luck with the baby. Dad says I can meet my new friend tomorrow. Through the pain, Clara smiled. Sometimes family wasn't what you were born into, or married into. Sometimes it was what you built from the ashes of what burned down. Rowan Whitmore came into the world at 3:47 a.m. on a warm August morning, his powerful cry echoing through the delivery room. Dr. Layla Calloway placed the squirming bundle on Clara's chest, while Ely, still holding her hand, watched with tears in his eyes. He's perfect, Clara whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, she caught a glimpse of what looked like her own sea-green color. Eli squeezed her hand gently, just like his mom. The next few hours passed in a blur of nurses, checks, and quiet moments of wonder. Marie and Graham arrived from Savannah, having caught the first flight out when Eli called them. They found their daughter glowing with exhaustion and joy. Their grandson sleeping peacefully in her arms. Damien's in the waiting room, Marie said softly, after they'd had their time with the baby. Hospital policy says we can't keep him out. Clara took a deep breath, looking down at Rowan's peaceful face. It's okay. He should meet his son. Eli started to leave, but Clara caught his hand. Stay. Please. When Damien entered, his usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. He stopped short at the sight before him. Clara in the hospital bed, Eli standing protectively nearby, and the tiny bundle that changed everything. "Would you like to meet your son?" Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "His name is Rowan Whitmore." Damien's face twitched at the surname, but he said nothing as he approached the bed. When Clara carefully transferred the baby to his arms, his hands trembled. "He has your eyes," Damien said quietly, studying the infant's face. For a moment, Clara saw a flash of the man she'd once loved, vulnerable, genuine, human. Then his phone buzzed. Isla's name flashed on the screen. The moment shattered. Damien carefully returned Rowan to Clara, his face closing off. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the visitation schedule." After he left, silence filled the room, until Rowan's soft whimper broke it. As Clara adjusted her position to nurse him, for the first time, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The Damien who just left wasn't the man she'd married. Maybe he never had been. She'd been in love with an illusion, a carefully constructed facade that had crumbled under pressure. "You okay?" Eli asked softly, once her parents had stepped out to get coffee. Surprisingly, yes, Clara smiled down at her nursing son. "For the first time, I really am." A knock at the door revealed Lily, practically bouncing with excitement, followed by a slightly apologetic Layla. She couldn't wait any longer to meet her new friend, Layla explained with a grin. Lily approached the bed carefully, her eyes wide with wonder. "He's so tiny." "Was I that tiny, Dad?" "Even smaller," Eli chuckled, lifting her up for a better view. Watching them, Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, happy ones this time. This was what family could be. Not a prison of expectations and appearances, but a safe harbor of acceptance and love. Later that evening, as the city lights twinkled through her private hospital room window, Clara scrolled through the photos on her phone. Pictures of Rowan with his grandparents, with Lily making funny faces at him, with Eli holding him so carefully while Clara rested. A text from Isla appeared. "Damien's devastated. You used your maiden name for the baby. This isn't over." But for once, the message didn't sting. Clara looked at her son, sleeping peacefully in his hospital bassinet, then at Eli, who'd fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, still refusing to leave them alone in the hospital. She deleted the message without responding, not out of spite, but out of peace. She no longer needed the last word. Let Damien and Isla play their games. Let them spiral in the illusions they built together. She had everything she needed right here. Her son, her strength, and a man who'd shown her what real support looked like. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered to Rowan. "Welcome to our perfectly imperfect family." November in Brooklyn painted the streets with golden leaves, a stark contrast to the gray morning 1 year ago, when Clara's world had shattered. Now, standing in her brownstone living room, surrounded by birthday decorations for Rowan's 3-month celebration, she could hardly believe how much had changed. The laughter echoing off the walls now was real, not rehearsed, not forced for appearances. "The cake's here," Lily announced, rushing in from the kitchen where Eli was arranging food. At 7, she had officially appointed herself Rowan's big sister, a role she took very seriously. And Dad didn't even drop it this time. "That was one time," Eli called out, following her with a grin. He stopped beside Clara, sliding an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity they'd developed. "And if I remember correctly," he added, "someone bumped into me while chasing a butterfly." Lily giggled from the other room. It was totally worth it. The doorbell rang, Marie and Graham arriving early to help with final preparations. They'd moved to New York 2 months ago, unable to bear being far from their grandson. They brought with them casseroles, board games, and unconditional presents. Harrison Hale had helped them find a place in the city, another unexpected ally in their corner. A man once stoic and reserved, now sending surprise baby gifts with handwritten notes. "Where's my favorite grandson?" Marie cooed, scooping Rowan from his playmat. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for her necklace with chubby fingers. Clara watched them, her chest tightening with something like awe. "Damien called," Graham said quietly to Clara. "He won't be coming today. Something about a major case." Clara nodded, unsurprised. No rage, no disappointment. Just the familiar acceptance of absence. Since Rowan's birth, Damien's involvement had been minimal, supervised visits that grew increasingly sporadic. Last week, his lawyer had contacted Diana about modifying the custody agreement, reducing his visitation rights in exchange for financial support. "It's better this way," Clara said, watching Rowan laugh at Lily's peekaboo game. "He needs consistency, not obligation. Not guilt wrapped in empty gestures." The afternoon filled their home with laughter and love. It spilled through the windows and into the quiet parts of Clara's heart, still learning how to hold joy. Dr. Layla Calloway arrived with her wife, both bearing more gifts for their already spoiled nephew. A knitted hat, a tiny blazer, and a framed sonogram photo of Rowan's heart from week 20. Signed with a note, "Strong from the start." Rose from the coffee shop brought her famous cookies and happy tears, having watched this unusual family come together over countless cups of coffee. She hugged Clara longer than usual, whispering, "Told you love could look different." Later, Eli found Clara in the kitchen, taking a quiet moment while the party continued in the living room. "Penny for your thoughts." "Just thinking about last November," she said, leaning into him. "How lost I felt. How impossible this happiness seemed. And now—" She smiled, eyes on the soft light spilling into the room. "Now I know that. Sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something better." Clara turned to face him, taking in the face that had become her home. "Thank you," she said, "for being there, while I put the pieces back together." "Thank you for letting me," Eli replied softly, before Lily's voice interrupted them. "Dad, Mom, Rowan's trying to eat the wrapping paper." They both froze at Lily's words. It was the first time she'd called Clara Mom. Their eyes met, sharing a moment of profound understanding, before rushing off to rescue Rowan from his paper feast. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Clara sat at her drafting table. The old sketchbook lay open before her, its pages now filled with new designs, new dreams. On the last page, she'd started a different kind of drawing. A family portrait. Not the perfect, polished family she'd once thought she needed, but the beautiful, messy, real one she'd found instead. Her phone lit up with a text from Isla. Damien signed the papers. "You won." Clara looked at the message, then at the framed photo on her desk. Rowan in Eli's arms, Lily making him laugh. All of them together at the park last weekend. She didn't need to respond to Eli. There was nothing left to say. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding the strength to let go of a life that was wrong for her, and the courage to embrace one that was right. She closed her sketchbook and walked to the nursery, where Eli was already putting away the last of Rowan's new toys. Their eyes met in the soft glow of the nightlight, and Clara felt that familiar warmth in her chest. Not the desperate, consuming love she'd had with Damien, but something steadier, truer. "Ready for bed?" Eli asked, holding out his hand. Clara took it, intertwining their fingers. "Ready. For everything." Outside, the November wind rustled through Brooklyn's trees, but this time it didn't carry warnings or regrets. Instead, it whispered of new beginnings, of love rebuilt from shattered pieces, of a future brighter than anything she could have imagined during those dark days a year ago. She'd learned that sometimes the best views come after the hardest climbs. That family isn't always blood, and that true love doesn't demand perfection. It offers acceptance, support, and the freedom to grow. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Rowan's soft breathing came through the baby monitor, and Eli's steady heartbeat beside her was the only lullaby she needed. Beneath her cheek, Clara smiled. She was no longer the woman who'd taken that pregnancy test in Savannah a year ago. She was stronger now, wiser, and finally, completely herself. November had come full circle, but this time, instead of endings, it brought beginnings, and she was ready for every single one. 3 years later, the Brooklyn Brownstones' kitchen was alive with chaos on a crisp spring morning. Rowan, now a spirited 3-year-old with his mother's sea-green eyes and untamable dark curls, sat at the counter carefully helping Eli make pancakes. More batter seemed to be on his face than in the bowl. He stirred with intense concentration, as if mixing magic into the morning. "Careful, little man," Eli laughed, wiping flour from his son's nose. "Remember what happened last time? I made it snow in the kitchen," Rowan declared proudly, making Lily, now 10 and fully embracing her role as big sister, roll her eyes affectionately from her spot at the table where she was finishing homework. "More like a blizzard," she muttered. but her smile gave her away. Clara watched from the doorway, one hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. Another surprise this spring had brought. Her design firm had just won a major contract. Her latest collection of digital art was featured in a Soho gallery, and the novel she'd written about her journey had found a publisher. The advance had been generous, but the real wealth lived in the rooms before her. But these professional achievements paled in comparison to the joy she found in these simple morning moments. Moments that weren't perfect, but were hers. The last time Damien had visited, 6 months ago, he'd barely recognized their son. Rowan had greeted him with polite confusion, more curious than affectionate. His life with Ela had imploded spectacularly. She'd left him for a rising politician, a scandal that had cost him his partnership at the firm. The tabloids had eaten it up. Clara hadn't read a single headline. He'd moved to California shortly after, his monthly support checks continuing, but his presence in Rowan's life fading to holiday cards and occasional video calls. Once, Rowan had asked if that man on the screen was someone from Mommy's old job. At first, it had hurt Clara to see her son's biological father become a stranger. She'd grieved, not for Damien, but for the idea she once clung to. But then she'd watch Eli spending hours building blanket forts with Rowan, teaching him to pray in Turkish, comforting him after nightmares, kissing scraped knees, answering endless why questions, and singing lullabies off-key until Rowan fell asleep on his chest. And she'd understand. Fatherhood had nothing to do with DNA. It had everything to do with presence, with patience, with love that showed up, even on the messy days. "Mom," Lily's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Did you tell Dad about the baby's name yet?" Eli looked up, curiosity bright in his eyes. They'd agreed to wait until birth to learn the gender, but Clara had been keeping the name choices close to her heart. "If it's a girl," she said, joining her family at the counter, "I was thinking Rose." She smiled at the memory of the coffee shop owner who'd unknowingly helped create this family. A woman who offered more than cookies. She'd offered space to heal. And if it's a boy, Harrison. A tribute to the man who'd shown her that people could surprise you in the best ways. Eli's eyes softened with understanding. He pulled her close, dropping a kiss on her flower-dusted hair. "Your heart's got good taste," he whispered. "Perfect. Can we go visit Aunt Layla today?" Rowan asked, somehow managing to get batter in his hair. "She promised to show me the baby pictures in Mommy's belly." "After we clean up this kitchen hurricane," Clara laughed. "And maybe after someone takes a bath." As she helped Eli and the kids restore order to the kitchen, Clara caught sight of their reflection in the window, all 4 of them, laughing. Messy, perfectly imperfect. A blur of motion and joy smeared in flour and light. On her finger, her new wedding ring caught the morning light. She and Eli had married in a small ceremony at the coffee shop where they'd met. Rose officiated, Lily as their flower girl, Rowan toddling down the aisle with the rings. They'd exchanged vows between coffee grinders and cookie trays, surrounded by people who'd loved them back to life. Life wasn't the carefully choreographed dance she'd once thought it should be. It was wild, unpredictable, full of broken pieces, shattered expectations, unanswered prayers, second chances, that could become beautiful mosaics if you were brave enough to rebuild. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marie about tonight's family dinner. Below it, an old message she'd kept, from Ela. "You'll never have the perfect family you wanted." Ela had been right in a way. Clara had let that message haunt her once, like a cruel whisper in the background of every hopeful moment. Clara didn't have the perfect family she'd once wanted. She had something better. The real family she needed. A family born not from perfection, but from love earned the hard way. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have planned. The end. Voiceover. If you discovered a betrayal while pregnant like Clara, would you have the courage to walk away from everything you knew, to protect a future that hadn't even arrived yet? Would you have the strength to start again from scratch in a new city, knowing that your ex-partner would fight for custody of the baby? At what point do you think Clara showed the most strength? Was it when she decided to leave Savannah while pregnant? When she confronted Damien and Isla personally? Or when she allowed herself to open her heart to Eli, even with all the traumas of the past? Your participation in the channel is very important. We want to hear from you. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel team so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.